teachers, all members. Please answer this question.
Well, I'm one of the candidates who was endorsed by the Albany Teachers Association, so I would be happy to continue to work with the teachers to collaborate, and I think that we have many models in this district of parents and staff and teachers working well together. I think unfortunately over the last couple of years there has been an erosion of trust and confidence along many different relationships within the district that are important for a feeling of safety and security and confidence and true collaboration. And if I were elected as a board member, I would look forward to working to repair some of that loss of trust.
I've known an awful lot of teachers over the time I've had kids in the schools, over the time I've been on the board. I certainly know a great many teachers from my time here in Albany. Neither Charlie and I were endorsed by the ATA, and I strongly suspect that they want non-incumbents because they'd rather have a less experienced board. I don't know how the ATA election was held. I don't know what percentage of the teachers would have said, oh, I'd rather have Ross on that board. I don't know. That said, I absolutely listen to anybody and everybody, including teachers, and have been, I think, supportive of a lot of the issues that the teachers care about, which are not all of the issues that all of us care about. But I am certainly open in my work as a board member on that, open to hearing from anybody, and I'd like to continue to do that. It's going to absolutely be a tough season coming up because the budget doesn't support keeping all of the people we've got, and that will be painful for all of us, especially for anyone that we let go. I'd like to keep as many people as we can, which is why I mentioned the idea if we could take funding that is going to go towards building schools and do what we need to do, I think, to maintain as best an educational environment as we can.
I've had an opportunity, as well as a couple other people here, to talk with some teachers in a small meeting, and the bottom line for the ATA, from my understanding, is that they do not feel that teachers are respected at the board and administrative level. That's the bottom line. And so they feel that they have brought concerns. They have sat on committees and made recommendations, but those things aren't heard. They don't see what they have spent hours working on somehow turn into any kind of action, or for that matter, any kind of communication back and forth. So I think it goes pretty basic to what many of the teachers are feeling, which is they want to be respected as professionals. After all, they work in the classrooms every single day with the students. They are the closest with the students, and they want to be heard at the district level, at the board level, and that apparently is what has not happened. So regardless of who sits on the board in this coming term, it's incumbent on those 5 members of the board to really reach out and listen to the stakeholders, and in this case, the teachers.
I think that, well, first I would like to say, I wouldn't say less experience, I'd say different experiences and fresh ideas. I think that as incumbents, you sit on the board, then they know a lot of the technical things that are happening because they currently serve on the board and they currently are at the meetings, and so they can throw a lot of the technical terms at you. However, I think that the 3 individuals that were endorsed by the Teachers Association have fresh ideas that they want to bring to the board to solve some of the current issues that are in place. And also I think that it's important to remember that the job of teachers is not an easy one, and it's not something that they just leave at school and go home. For any of you that know teachers or have had conversations with teachers, it's something that they are working at all the time. If they're either at home working on things for the next class, or even when they're out on the weekends, hanging out with their family, they're thinking about how they can make the class better. And so I think having an understanding of that, being willing to work with them as well as with City Council to make the district better is an important tool that each board member should have.
So my response is you'll have to talk to the ATA leadership to ask them to explain why they made the endorsements they made. That's not something I have information about. But I think you should also talk to individual teachers. And I think when you talk to individual teachers, you will find every one of them says that I treat teachers with respect and I take their input seriously. I do not think you'll find teachers who disagree with that statement. What I have been pleased to do over the past 4 years is to work with both teachers and parents on many committees. We have a design committee for each and every school project that includes teachers, and we keep revising those designs based on what teachers tell us they want those classrooms to look like. We have a budget advisory committee. I came from that meeting earlier tonight. We have parents and teachers on that committee, and when they bring us their recommendations, I will be paying attention to what they recommend. So I have to disagree with the picture that Clementina has painted for you. I do not think the board ignores the input of teachers. I do not think the board ignores the concerns of teachers.
So starting with Ross, following the discriminatory incidents at AHS, students and community members felt that the school board and administration were unprepared to deal with the situation. How will you give teachers and administrators the tools they need to properly and equitably take action if a similar situation does arise?
Well, I'm actually rather concerned that if another similar situation did arise, we'd get similarly bad outcomes. I got an email about the racist, misogynist, anti-Semitic, etc. graffiti, and my daughter did not. Okay. Students, I don't think, were informed by the administration, certainly not by email, not like I got it as a parent or a board member. Communication is a huge, huge issue, and communication in the Instagram incident was awful. And I was one of the people saying it needed to be much better and trying to give every reason how it could be, to the point of emailing people at the Department of Education to ask for clarifications on what FERPA meant, and couldn't say something like 14 students have been suspended rather than administrative steps have been taken. So I have been battling in ways that you can't see with the attorneys that our district is being advised by, who I don't think did a very good job of it. I do not think they were skilled to handle a crisis. So I have been absolutely adamant that communication, more transparency and openness is necessary, and it's an ongoing battle.
Could you repeat the question? Yes.
Following the discriminatory incidents at AHS, students and community members felt that the school board and administration were unprepared to deal with the situation. How will you give teachers and administrators the tools they need to properly and actively take action if a similar situation does arise?
A rabbi in Pittsburgh yesterday said the hate has got to stop. And it starts with every single one of us. And I think the Instagram incident was just an example of how young people are given permission to express and given permission these days to express some feelings they have that are hurtful to other people. I think, first of all, it starts with each and every one of us. In terms of what happened a year and a half, 2 years ago, it was, I believe, on the board as the leaders of this district to stand up and be articulate and resolve to do certain things. Now, it's easy being the Monday morning quarterback, right? But at the same time, I think that's what the leadership always has to keep in mind, that they have to present what steps can be taken. So in addition, I'm sorry, I get quite emotional about this because it was never resolved. It has not been resolved. And from what I understand, many things happen in the district that are never resolved. So we have got to be more transparent, more communicative with everybody, and in particular with the students, because we're the role models.
I think that it's important to look at a few things when we're talking about what happened at the high school. One, I don't feel as if the students received the support that they needed, and it was going to the board meetings and going to the different meetings and meeting with the students and the parents that were involved. It was hard to watch, actually, the lack of support that the students received. And it's another one of the major reasons why I'm sitting up here talking to you today and why I'm running for the board, because the lack of support that they received was heartbreaking, and it didn't seem fair. And often, an excuse for the lack of support that the student receives, or, well, I can't talk to you about this, I can't talk to you about that, or these are things that you might not understand, or the lawyer's this or the lawyer that, and none of those things help the students through the situation. None of those roadblocks help them. And so, for me, it was frustrating, and so that needs to change. And certain things that you can be, certain things you can be prepared for, certain things you can't be prepared for. However, you can prepare for something like that by changing the makeup of the board so that it represents all students in the district.
So I think that the premise of the question is correct. Neither the staff nor the board were prepared for what actually happened. It's pretty hard to be prepared for something like that. It never would have occurred to me to use a social media account for that purpose, at least not among students talking about other students. There are many things we could do differently. I'll just name a few. I'm really sorry that the first approach to the disciplinary actions involved kind of a blanket treatment of all students. That's not right. We treat students as individuals. And in fact, the district lost part of the case in federal court because a federal judge said the district violated the First Amendment free speech rights of 4 of the students. There are many other things that we could do differently. I think we need more education around social media. It's never private. You might think it's set up as a private account, it becomes public. So we need to work on that, and we need to work on how we talk to each other. We need to work on how we bring about resolution of some of these conflicts. I agree with Clementina, it's not resolved. There's still a lot of hurt and anger in the community, and it's not resolved yet. It needs to be talked about. It can't be talked about at a board meeting when people come to us and they talk to us about matters not on the agenda, because legally the board cannot reply. If something's not on the agenda, the board can't talk about it. So we need some other forums.
I think that adding to what much of Clementina and Brian said, I think that unlike Charlie, I do think we could have seen this coming. I think that we know the kind of society we live in and we're not immune from it. And I think it's only a matter of time before something similar happens. And I think that what we need to work on in the meantime is creating leadership by the board for moving us in a different direction. One of the most painful there are many painful aspects of that process, but one that was so striking was how many families and children stood up and said, this has been happening to my child in Albany for 8 years, for 10 years. This happened to my kid in kindergarten, who's now a sophomore, and it was never dealt with. And I think that that level of pain and that level of not addressing incidents of racism, of bias, of sexism is something that the board can begin to work on right now. We don't have to wait for the next incident. We know that teachers and staff and counselors are working very hard to address these issues in their classroom, in their one-on-one meetings, and we need to make sure that we're working with them to create policies in place to address issues of bullying and harassment and racism when they arise, so that we don't have this pent-up anger and sorrow when the next incident happens. That's not going to be right.
Vaping and e-cigarettes pose a huge threat to the health of students in the middle school and high school. What measures would you suggest to prevent the use of these products?
Okay, I read up on vaping. I did horrible last time around when that question came up. You know, it's tobacco in a different form, and it's super unhealthy. And that's, of course, an old-timer like me saying something like that to young kids that want to experiment with a lot of different things. But this is one I hope you would really seriously consider for yourself and your friends, that it's not so cool as you may think. That's what I would say to you as a grandmother. You know, and so I think at this point, a whole lot of education has to go on that obviously has not gone on, because I hear it's very popular in general with high school students. And students, while young people always think they're invincible, the dangers that go with vaping, that go with tobacco is so serious that I hope that the teachers here at the high school have been prepared to deal with it, or certainly will ongoing continue to address it. But peer pressure is the most best way for the word to get out, that this is not something that makes you look cool or smell cool, or that is, and that hopefully there's a whole lot of other things out there that are fun in life.
I think that helping students understand how dangerous it really is. Consequences are something that follow your actions, and so the consequences of using tobacco, smoking cigarettes, or vaping, obviously they have, they come with health risks. I unfortunately have had more than one family member who passed away from cancer because of the use of tobacco products. And I know that that's not always something easy to talk about. Sometimes it can be a little scary, but it's important for students to understand that there are consequences when you partake in things that hurt your body. Plus, you're so young. There's so much more for you to do, and why take away from it by partaking in that? Also, making sure that there are policies in place and activities in place to kind of negate those activities and give other things to do versus.
So we have board policies and state policies around what you can and cannot do on the school campus. That includes vaping. And it's in the handbook, and students and parents read the handbook and they sign and agree to abide by the school policies and school rules. That's on campus during school hours. And so we expect people to live by the commitments they've made. Now, when it comes to what students choose to do outside school hours, off campus, I don't think you want the school staff following you around and telling you what to do. What we can do, though, is we can provide courses or educational opportunities so that everybody is fully informed about what the consequences of their choices are. And if you have that information and you choose to act on it in a constructive way, in a positive way, great. If you choose to act on it differently, that is a choice that you've made.
So when we had this question at the last forum, I had only recently heard from my pediatrician, talking to my 12-year-old who looks 18, so could definitely walk into a corner store and buy jewels. I think it's a concern. I find it interesting that we've had a question about it in 2 forums and not had a question about marijuana, about other drug use, about other things that I think are part of a universe of possibilities for kids beginning at 12. I see those kids when they're on their own, living by themselves in college, the heady days of freedom, and now in California, and virtually unfettered access to marijuana in particular. I think that I would prefer to see this contextualized in a conversation about how we all make healthy choices for ourselves. And yeah, I think I'll leave it at that and put it in the context of how we think about the things that influence the decisions that we make, whether it's advertising, our life chances, the communities we live in, and having a conversation that's a little more enriched, if you will.
Well, the comedian in me thinks that maybe we should just the board debate, and it would become very uncool very fast. So Brian's comment actually reminded me of something I've come to a couple of times as themes during this campaign, and that's the space and time issues around the school, right? There's the classroom and what happens in that square box over the period of 50 minutes, say. But all of the other space and time the students spend in school and around and with their friends before school, after school, in the halls, at lunch, etc. And organizing and making that space as educational as in the classroom is important. So, for example, in addressing the Instagram issues, the Speak and Stands work with younger students or at the high school was an enormous part, I think, of helping to get the word out and helping opinions to sort of percolate up and be discussed. So why not say, invite college students in to talk about, well, when you're 24, you're not really focused on how cool it is to vape. You're worried about this, that, or the other. Passing your classes, thinking about the job you want, looking at the opportunities you'll have if you do well, wanting to travel. I doubt we would get any college student in here who would say, yeah, vaping, that's at the top of my priority list. Have the students hear those sorts of things from older peers, I think, is as good a way as any to say, well, this is an issue that you might think is cool now. It's not relevant to your bigger life.
Okay, so if you have any questions, or if you've written down any questions, please hand them down to the end of the aisle and raise your hand if you end up having one, and there are students who are going to take one for you. No, so there's one more question before the bio. So, during our interviews that we had throughout the district, we received feedback related to the superintendent's salary in relation to the teacher's salary. An anonymous teacher asked us to share, so this is the quote, "I have 2 masters, and I am a highly qualified educator, and I don't think the superintendent has 4 times the education and 4 times the workload that I do, but she makes 4 times as much as I do. How do you think AUSD should go about reviewing equity in employee compensation?"
I won't take up too much time with this question. I will simply say that the superintendent makes too much, and all teachers are underpaid. I think that the work of a teacher is, like I've said this before, it never stops. And so for somebody who's working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, they should make a lot of money. Plus, they have the most important job of educating our students. They also have the job of keeping our students safe, because students spend more time at school than they do at home during the school year. So you are not only counting on those teachers to educate your students, but you're also counting on them to keep them safe. And that's not to say that the job of the superintendent isn't very important. It's an important job, and there are a lot of moving parts that go along with it. And the superintendent should also be well compensated, but not that much.
As a board member, I'd rather pay our administrative staff less money than more, but that's not always the reality. You're in a competitive market for top administrators. So our superintendent's salary is competitive with other superintendent's salary. And I just want to provide a little more context and perspective on this. You know, the top teaching salary is $96,000 a year, and that's for a 180-day work year. The superintendent has a 240-day work year. So the superintendent comes to that job having many, many years of education experience. He or she would be at the top of a teacher's pay schedule. Add into that factor that teachers receive health care benefits, the superintendent does not. The superintendent pays them out of pocket. So that factor of 4 disparity is not really a factor of 4. It might be a factor of 2, though. And that is kind of the reality in terms of what society at large chooses to pay managers and administrators, and what society at large chooses to pay teachers. It's not something we have a lot of control over. We could pay somebody a lot less money as superintendent. You do get what you pay for.
I think, like Brian, I'll also be short and sweet. I think that Charlie's right. The market sets a certain salary scale for superintendents and one for teachers, and I think that it's shocking that we have set them the way that we have, and I don't think that we need to participate in reinforcing what are, even with some math, significant inequities in how we reward teaching staff in particular in our country. And I would like to do our best to work not to take those inequalities as a given.
I think most of what I would say has been said. That said, we will have to replace Measure LL, parcel tax, if we want to maintain another about $1.5 million of the budget that we'd rather not cut. And as I suggested, there may be ways to trade off future construction for reducing the annual cost of the general fund. We rent a lot of portables and things. So I'm absolutely open to looking to make as much money available for teachers as we can, recognizing that, yes, the state is the one that says education ought to be only this much, and that's about it. Berkeley has higher parcel taxes than we do. We could consider going that route, but we have the huge burden of the school bonds, so I don't know. But those are really the only resources we have to bring more money to the table. It'll be a very interesting question when we get around to issues of staffing and cuts, because the projections we're making say don't assume giving teacher raises, and giving teacher raises means even more cuts. So we actually have to be weighing as a board and taking to the table for negotiations the issues of retaining as many bodies as we can versus paying some of the few we have remaining more. That's a really tough discussion. I welcome you guys showing up at board meetings when we address that this fall.
So just to clarify,
You'd like to add a comment?
yeah, just to clarify on what Charlie said, in 2016, the superintendent had benefits of $30,000 along with the $210,000 salary. So they do receive benefits.
She pays her own benefits.
Well, that's just according to Transparent.
friends here in California.
Well, whatever their source of information is, I can tell you she pays her own benefits out of her salary. So they've subtracted or they've done something.
They didn't answer.
This is somewhat of a revolutionary type question that, you know, it could really be turned the other way. I always thought that kindergarten teachers were really the most important teacher and should be compensated. Maybe you do remember your kindergarten teacher. And the college professors should get paid lesser than the kindergarten teachers because the perks are so much better at the university, for example. So we can invert it. We can do all kinds of things. But you know, that's certainly not the way it's done here, and we recognize, you know, it's always top down in terms of salaries and perks. But maybe if that's a serious consideration, if it truly is, from the community, from the parents and students and teachers, that is something that could be talked about. I mean, it's not going to be solved today, but if you all feel strongly about that, then that's something that could be explored. I think it's open.
Thank you. We'll be taking our 5-minute break, and then we will open up for audience questions.